It was definitely a point in my life and in my career. There was a moment when I realized that I needed to leave the school where I was teaching because that wasn't what I wanted to be doing with my life. And it caused me to question, like, well, is anything that I'm doing with my life what I really want to be doing with my life? And to be honest with you, the answer was no. Leaving and going to a new environment where I would have lots of time to do exactly what I was saying I wanted to do was the best decision I ever made, because it was like, okay, well, I'm here to do this, so now I have to do it. And I had to face all of that imposter syndrome, and I started writing my blog. So it was really an incredible experience to pivot in such a strong way at that time.
Hey everybody, this is Chris from honestypill.com. You're listening to episode 8 of the Honesty Pill podcast. This season on the show, I'll be talking to innovative musician entrepreneurs who have created new ways of performing, new ways of teaching, and new ways of serving their audiences. My guest today is world-class cellist, coach, and creator of The Profit Pivot for Musicians, Kate Kayaian. And we're going to talk about how for her, the hustle culture of freelancing was not sustainable, healthy, or fulfilling, what made her leave behind a thriving career in Boston to live full-time on a tropical island, and what it was like to launch a virtual online cello festival during the COVID-19 pandemic. You're even going to get a quick Armenian pronunciation lesson, so you're welcome. I've known Kate for a long time, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Let's dig in. So, Kate, I'm so happy to have you here on the show. Thank you for being here.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here, Chris. Thanks for having me.
So let's jump right in, and I want to ask you probably the most important question that I can, which is, why do people have such a hard time pronouncing your last name?
My last name is Armenian, and it's pronounced Kayaian, as you said, and it's just a difficult name. It's a Turkish word, kaya, with an Armenian ending, I-A-N, and it just doesn't roll off the tongue terribly easily. So I always say it rhymes with Hawaiian. Yes, I'm always shocked when people can pronounce it correctly. I never expect it, and I am certainly never offended if they say something else. So, but you nailed it. Good job.
One of the things that I love about musicians is so true of musicians is that we're all in such a small network. We're all one or two steps removed from each other. And that's true for you and I as well. We both went to NEC, lived in Boston. In fact, you had a place about 2 blocks from one of my favorite beer halls in the universe, which is sadly no longer a business. But what was it, the 39 bus we used to ride out to JP from Boston Symphony Hall?
39 bus, yeah. I ran down Huntington Avenue.
What was it like growing up in Boston musically and getting your education there?
You mean as far as college is concerned? It was amazing. I mean, I grew up in Chicago in the suburbs, so it wasn't that big a change to go to Boston. But yeah, just having Symphony Hall right across the street from New England Conservatory and being surrounded by music and musicians and universities. I mean, I couldn't have asked for a better college experience, hands down. And I got to go to school with you.
Who did you study with?
I studied with Colin Carr, who is a brilliant soloist. So that was really cool for me. My teachers that I grew up with were phenomenal. I mean, they are legendary teachers, but they were teachers. They didn't perform. And so it was really cool to have that change when I went to NEC, to have somebody who was also a great teacher, but could really demonstrate. And I mean, at times he knew me so well, we would have this sort of anything you can do, I can do better type of lessons where I would be very proud of myself and play something, and he would just smile and pick up his cello and play it better. So
that sounds a lot like trumpet players doing high note contests, but I bet yours sounded a lot better.
Well, he was pretty amazing. He knew that would get me motivated and back into the practice room, so it worked.
Was your goal to be a chamber musician, a teacher, an orchestral musician? What was sort of your focus of your studies in Boston?
I don't know that I had one. I was one of those typical, young, talented musicians who went to a conservatory. I was lucky enough to have gotten in and just went along, and you're so used to being told what to do by your teachers. And I loved chamber music. I was very successful. I was in some honors groups at NEC, but nobody said, when I graduated, I didn't have a formed string quartet that I was going to go off with. So that I wasn't doing that. I couldn't afford to go to grad school, and loans were not a thing in my family. It just wasn't a word that we ever said. So grad school was off the table. And then the New World Symphony popped up for auditions and kind of kidnapped me and took me to Miami. So there I was an orchestral musician just because that's what I was told I was going to be. While that was an incredible experience for me being at New World and I got so much out of it and I would not trade those years for anything, the most important lesson that I learned there was that I did not want to be an orchestral musician.
Why did you come to the revelation that that wasn't for you?
I get restless and I like to do lots of different things. And at the time, I sort of equated, okay, orchestral musicians can do lots of things. Look at you. But the idea of going to the same hall every day to work with the same people, playing the same repertoire with the same conductors and the same soloists was less interesting to me. And I noticed that most of the people around me loved that idea. They loved the idea of going to a hall, having a locker for their instrument and their concert clothes, and just having that be sort of a second home. And they loved the stability of it. They loved that they knew exactly what they were going to be doing. And that terrified me. So I had to tell Michael Tilson Thomas that I was not going to take him up on his very generous offer of a fourth year, and I was going to move back to Boston to figure it out and freelance. And I was terrified to tell him that.
I want to talk about your freelance period of your life in a minute, but roll it back to the idea of the sort of Groundhog Day feeling of playing in an orchestra with the same repertoire. Even if you're playing new music, a lot of it is very repetitions in some ways. You are playing with the same exact colleagues in the same way, having the same types of musical conversations day in and day out. And it begs the question that I don't know if I've talked about on this show yet or not, is being an orchestral musician a creative endeavor? In reality, my job is not to be creative. My job is to interpret, to execute, to follow, to pivot, to listen, and do what I'm asked to do. Even if you're a principal player, your job is to check your creativity in some ways at the door. It's certainly your ego at the door, and to be part of a team, be part of an organism that moves together with the wishes of the composer, as far as we can interpret what's on the page anyway, under the guidance of a music director or a conductor. So is that kind of like, would you say that sort of encapsulates your feelings about not wanting to do that, or was there something else?
That's a great question. I'm not sure that I was at a point. I was 21 years old at the time. I'm not sure I was able to see it as clearly as I can see it today. I'm not the type of person who does well working for somebody else. I can. I'm respectful. It's not like I'm a horrible employee, but I prefer to be making my own decisions. I prefer to have a lot more say in how things go. Now, I don't know if that's creativity or just my own personality of wanting to be my own boss. But yeah, it was more the monotony of it. I wanted to get out and see the world and travel on my own terms. I loved the repertoire of solo and chamber music more. And I just looked at the things that I was doing at New World. And I loved playing principal because I got to play solos and because I got to be more involved with the conductor and the other principal players in decision making. We did a lot of recordings, we did a lot of contemporary music, and I had a lot more say in that. And I loved doing the chamber music series, and we had a few series where we could just come up with our own projects, and I loved doing that. And so, I sort of looked at it one day and said, the one thing that I am not as excited about here is actually playing in an orchestra. And I knew that there were so many people out there whose dream it was to not only play in an orchestra, but to go to New World to get that kind of training. And I felt like I was taking a spot from somebody who could really use it. So I went off and figured it out. Yeah. But to answer your question, I'm not sure. I didn't feel like I wasn't being creative. Maybe I was being too creative. Maybe that was the problem in my orchestral playing.
It's worth mentioning, and anyone who's listening who is a student right now or aspiring to get an orchestra job, and might take a route through something like Chicago Civic or a New World or something, they would probably be just having a very hard time understanding why someone would say no thank you to another year of something so great. But that's just the experience that we have, and the hindsight is 2020, of course. And kudos to you for realizing that wasn't a good fit and realizing that maybe someone else could step into that space. But before we leave the topic of New World, what would you say was the best thing that came out of it for you, other than the realization that this wasn't for you?
The best thing that came out of my time at New World was the exposure that I had to working with musicians who were not cellists on my musicality. I remember one of the most memorable master classes I've ever attended was with Thomas Hampson. And I will never forget what I learned about playing the cello from a bass baritone. Yeah, and everything, conversations that I had with conductors and my colleagues, but just every soloist who came taught us so much. Every composer who came taught me so much. And I realized that music was not just about playing my cello. That's been huge. I mean, that's the most important lesson we can learn as any instrumentalist, is that it's not just about our instrument, it's about all music.
So you finished up at New World and you made the decision to go back to Boston and step foot into what I would describe as one of the most chaotic, challenging ways to make a living that there is. And we're talking about freelancing. So what was your experience in Boston freelancing?
All of the above. Fortunate, lucky, wonderful, exciting, leading to overwhelming, burnt out, exhausted. So because I had gone to New England Conservatory and had spent summers at Tanglewood, I had a lot of great connections in Boston. So when I moved back, I moved back knowing that I would be playing with certain organizations and certain orchestras. So I felt very privileged and very lucky to have steady work right away. I also played, the winter season at the Sarasota Opera. So I would go down to Florida for the winters and, summers at Tanglewood. It was really the ideal situation for a musician, especially when you're in your early 20s and you don't care about being broke all the time. Because of course you are. And that led to some teaching positions opening up. And a conductor friend of mine gave me the advice of just say yes to everything. Say yes to everything as a young freelancer. Just say yes to every opportunity. And then you peel some away as you realize that commute is hellish. I don't want to do that. Or this music school has horrible students that I don't like teaching. So you get rid of that job and you just sort of carve it out. But I wasn't so good at that. You get locked into this habit as a freelancer of it being a giant jigsaw puzzle. I wasn't married. I didn't have kids, so I didn't have other priorities pulling at me. My schedule was completely 100% my schedule. And so if it fit, I did it. And if it was if I had an hour and a half break and somebody needed a cellist to play at a funeral, I was there.
You said yes to everything based on the advice of your conductor friend, which I think, if I'm interpreting that advice correctly, it was try everything, try it on, get yourself out there. You're going to learn something. Even if it's a quartet gig in front of Dunkin' Donuts, you're going to get something out of that. Is there another reason that you see people saying yes to everything when they're freelancing that maybe isn't so healthy?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it was the reason why I didn't take the second half of his advice of then starting to say no to the things you didn't like. And I think there's a huge scarcity mindset. Well, two things. I think there's a scarcity mindset of, we're not getting paid enough for these gigs. And so you're constantly trying to make a little bit more money. There's a sense of competition in the freelance world, not amongst each other, but amongst ourselves of however much money I made last year, I bet I could make more next year. So you're always trying to up that. And then I think, there's just this stigma that if you're not playing a gig or if you're not doing something, it's because you're not good or you weren't asked. And so to be seen doing everything makes it seem I'm in demand. Everybody wants me. So therefore I'm important and I'm good, which is horribly unhealthy.
I would say that even if you're thinking about competition with yourself, can I make as much money as I did last year? Even that is a more healthy mindset than what I did when I was a freelancer, which is, what if I don't make as much money as I did last year? And there was a certain level of panic driving my actions. So
Right.
freelancing is an interesting ruler to measure your mindset and your scarcity and your relationship with money, and really questioning why you got into this in the first place.
Absolutely. And I think you have to pay attention to those things. I have a colleague who had said yes to a group, a gig. Had been playing with that group for over a decade. And she went to the first rehearsal, and then she got the news that her grandmother passed away, and she had to leave town. So she, what are you going to do? Sorry, Grandma, I'm not coming to your funeral. I got a gig. And so she didn't get paid for that gig, and she didn't even get paid for the one rehearsal that she did. And it wasn't so much that she needed the money, but she was just so turned off by the idea of like, here's this group that I've been a part of. Like, they've been so important to me. I've given up so much to be with this group for over 10 years. I have a family crisis, and and it wasn't the organization's fault. I mean, it's just, this is how things are set up. These are the union rules, and this is how it works. And so it's more of I think this pandemic has opened a lot of people's eyes to, people talk about going back to the new normal, and I can't wait till concert halls open up and we start playing gigs. I think a lot of things are going to look different. I don't think people are just going to be so grateful to have a concert that they take anything. I think that actually people are going to be asking for a little bit more.
By the way, sorry, Grandma, I'm not coming to your funeral. I got a gig. Needs to be a country music song. We need to get somebody out there on that right now. So I wanted to say, before we leave this part of our conversation, I wanted to say something about Boston. It was a great place to freelance. There was so many opportunities in different types of groups. Boston is an amazing city, historic. There's so many places and like world famous concert halls. We have Symphony Hall there. Can you tell me about one memorable gig or just one interesting gig that you'll never forget and we're grateful to have?
I remember one quartet concert that I was playing just in a tiny little church somewhere. And it was like an afternoon concert, one of those noontime concerts. And this little old man came up to us afterwards and said, to my colleague, he said, I see you're playing with a carbon fiber bow. She said, yeah. And so he was like, could I see it? And she's showing him the carbon fiber bow, and he's asking us, have we ever played carbon fiber instruments? And I'm sitting here thinking, like, we have gorgeous string instruments. Like, why is he so excited about our carbon fiber bows? I mean, I didn't have one, but he was really into it. And then he introduced himself, and he was the man who invented carbon fiber.
Okay.
So I think that's just what I loved about the whole thing. I mean, yes, I played with amazing conductors and in these great halls, Jordan Hall and Symphony Hall. And musically, I can't tell you one story because there were so many great memories. But just the idea that those are the people that are at your concerts in Boston, like, just such a colorful history and so many great minds. And it was always a surprise and a delight. And as you said, just being able to drive, you're playing concerts in Maine, spending 4 days in Portland, Maine with your friends in a hotel. And, it's great. It's fun.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, you don't live in Boston anymore. You took a little bit of a move. Can you tell us a little bit about where you are right now and what are you doing there?
Well, I live in the beautiful island paradise of Bermuda now. What I do there? I mean, not much. It's nice. I moved here because, I met a guy and he had a job here. And for years, I sort of assumed that he would get a job in Boston. And then after spending a few years going back and forth to Bermuda, realizing that I was completely burnt out from freelancing and that it wasn't allowing me the time to do what I really wanted, I picked up and moved to Bermuda, packed my cat and my cello and flew over here. So yeah, it's great. I suddenly went from having 0 time in my calendar to having my mornings free to practice, gardens to work in, obviously oceans to swim and sail in, and it's been incredible. Just the freedom, the time, the white space in my calendar to come up with new projects and new ideas and figure out exactly what I wanted to be doing with my time.
If you take a snapshot of your experience in Boston, you instantly got into New World. You were offered another year. You were playing with the top groups. Things were great. It's not a small thing that you decided to just up and move to Bermuda. Tell me about the decision to pack up your cello and your cat and leave the city that had been so good to you?
This has been kind of the story of my life. I creep into situations and slowly creep out of them. So, little known fact, Bermuda is only a 90-minute flight from Boston. And, as you said, I had done pretty well in my freelance life, and was teaching quite a lot. I worked a lot with the Boston Youth Symphony Orchestras and was playing with a lot of groups that have maybe 6-7 concerts a year, but it wasn't an every weekend type of thing. So the only job that I really had to leave completely was my teaching job, which I was very sad about, but I knew that was not, I didn't want to retire from being a high school cello teacher and orchestra director. As much as I loved it, loved the kids, loved the school, loved my colleagues, it wasn't my calling, and I was ready to let that go. But I kept my condo in Boston and ran the chamber music program for the youth orchestra from afar. That's quite easy to do. I just couldn't coach anymore, which I missed. And I would fly back and forth to play with some of the groups like Boston Modern Orchestra Project, who I was very committed to. And so that slowly dwindled as it became less ideal to fly back and forth. I finally sold the condo this year. So it was like a 3-year transition of leaving. But it was definitely a point in my life and in my career. There was a moment when I realized that I needed to leave the school where I was teaching because that wasn't what I wanted to be doing with my life. And it caused me to question, is anything that I'm doing with my life what I really want to be doing with my life? And to be honest with you, the answer was no. And there were things that I wanted to be playing, pieces, repertoire that I wanted to be playing, concerts that I wanted to be doing that I wasn't doing because I didn't have time to. And I wasn't giving myself the time to do them because I was nervous that I couldn't do them, which is a whole mindset issue, and imposter syndrome, and this, that, and the other. And so leaving and going to a new environment where I would have lots of time to do exactly what I was saying I wanted to do was the best decision I ever made, because it was like, okay, well, I'm here to do this, so now I have to do it. And I had to face all of that imposter syndrome, and I started writing my blog, which really allowed me to express things that I couldn't express through the cello, and ideas, and brought new colleagues towards me and started conversations with longtime colleagues who said, I loved what you wrote there. I've been thinking the same thing. So it was really an incredible experience to pivot in such a strong way at that time.
Tell us the name of your blog, and also what would you say the focus? Why should someone read your blog? What are they going to get out of it?
The name of the blog is Tales from the Lane, and the reason it's called that is because I live on a little strip of water that trails out of the harbor, and it's called the Lane. And it started out as just a lifestyle blog. I was like, well, I'm in Bermuda. I'm just going to write a blog for anybody about life in Bermuda, and nobody cared what some expat living in Bermuda had to say about what she did on her weekends and what she cooked for dinner. And I started writing more and more about being a cellist and about being a performer and about traveling and about teaching and about learning music. And all of a sudden people started reading it and they started to respond, and I started to get messages and emails, and it was really resonating with both professional musicians who were grateful for the conversations and the things that I was saying, things like we don't get paid enough in the freelance world and we shouldn't burn ourselves out. And it also resonated with sort of early professionals, students finishing up college, parents of advanced students enjoyed reading it because it gave them some insight into this whole world that their kids were getting involved in. Yeah, and it's led to a lot of really great relationships, and I'm so grateful for it. I'm so glad nobody was interested in what I did over my weekends.
Let's talk a little bit about where this did lead you, because you did have time in your garden and you went sailing, and you had that downtime that you desperately needed and wanted to recharge. And then something happened. You had a bit of a pivot in your identity, or what you thought you were going to be connecting with and how you're going to be bringing your skills out to people. You set up your first Virtual Summer Cello Festival.
That is correct. Well, I wasn't only spending time in my garden. What I did when I moved to Bermuda is I wanted to do more solo recitals and travel. And so that's what I was doing the past few years, is putting programs together and then touring all over the US and playing them. And I had a big West Coast tour. I was supposed to hang out with you and Amanda in LA. And that was scheduled for late March into mid-April. I was going to go from Los Angeles all the way up to Seattle, doing a ton of concerts. And I was really excited about it, had worked on it all year. Obviously, that got canceled. And the last concert I played was a recital that I had here in Bermuda, scheduled for March 13th. And I remember thinking to myself, you know what, I'm tired. It was a big year of traveling for me. I had played a lot, been working really hard on a lot of projects. And I was like, this is good, actually. So instead of spending our spring break, running all over the West Coast, playing all these exhausting concerts, I'm just going to rest and relax. And about 2 hours later, I said to myself, or I could start a virtual summer cello festival, because everything at that point, it was becoming obvious that things were going to get canceled. And I just remember being that age and how important festivals were to me. I went to Encore, I went to Bowdoin, I went to Tanglewood. Later I taught at Killington. And I mean, summer festivals are magical and incredibly important for high school and college and grad school students. So I thought, well, they're not going to have them. They're going to be canceled. I should start one that's online. And I had been teaching my students in Boston and traveling back and forth. I'd been teaching them online for years and kind of knew the technology and figured, why not?
So how long was the festival planned to go, and what kind of artists were you bringing in? What were people going to get out of this?
Yeah, well, it was going to be a 7-week festival. So later, a lot of things popped up that were 1 week, 2 weeks. And I wanted to have a really fully immersive students who otherwise would have nothing to do all summer, just get them working on projects. So it was 7 weeks long, and I wanted to give them the accountability and practicing, but I didn't want to keep them online all day long because nobody likes that. But the other side of it, of the pandemic, of everything getting canceled, all the concerts were canceled around the world. So I knew there were all these incredible soloists and all of these incredible cellists who would have been teaching at Tanglewood and Aspen. They would be free, and they don't have to fly anywhere. I didn't have to fly anybody anywhere. I didn't have to find them housing and feed them for 7 weeks. I said, this is great. So I invited people from all over the world to come in and do master classes and teach lessons. And I brought in experts on everything from making cello rosin to yoga. So yeah, it was just every week there was one expert training session. There was guest master class and another studio class, and then lessons. So it was a really, really fun project.
It's worth pointing out that not everyone who experienced cancellations of their tours, West Coast tours, concert series, you probably weren't the only person who had this idea of creating a cello festival, were you?
No. I'm sure, I think probably a lot of people had this idea of creating something. I think a lot of people probably did have this reaction of, you know what I should do, or what would be cool, and then they just didn't follow through on it. So I don't think I'm that special. I think that I do tend to look at situations and try to find a solution. I mean, my mom reminded me after I was, in the trenches of putting this virtual cello festival together, she reminded me of a summer. She thinks I was like 10 or 11, 12 maybe, and we didn't have a lot of money, and they had to tell me that I couldn't do a certain summer camp or festival that I wanted to do. Maybe it was a workshop. So I was going to be stuck at home. And so I had a lot of neighbors who had little kids on my block. And so I started this afternoon little camp in my backyard. And so the parents would send their kids to me. I had blankets set up, and I would read them stories, and I would give them lemonade, and we'd make like arts and crafts projects. And I was too young to really be babysitting, but they knew my mom was home and they were home. But I made a fortune that summer. I made so much money because I had like 8, 9 kids coming to my house every day.
You were a musician entrepreneur before you were old enough to babysit. I think that is brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. I was still in the Suzuki books and I was a musician entrepreneur. But the festival, it had its scary moments, and I dealt with a lot of imposter syndrome. I sort of felt in the beginning when I had the idea, my first thought was, well, all of the big festivals are going to do something online. And all of the music schools, all of the conservatories are going to put out an online summer festival. So, I might launch mine first, and then all of these great, incredible things are going to come afterwards, and mine's going to be laughable. Well, that didn't happen. Some festivals went online, and I was grateful because I felt like, okay, maybe it's not such a dumb idea. But yeah, it was an incredible experience, and the students were all super close. We're all in touch. Some of them are still working with me. It led actually to the creation of just a year-long online studio program that I'm doing that incorporates studio classes and guest master classes as well. So it led to future projects. Yeah, I'm grateful that I had the idea, but I had nothing to do with that. The idea just came to me. But I am grateful that I, through the support of friends and colleagues and a coach, decided to just do it.
So enrollment, getting people to find your program and then say yes, please, and thank you to it is easy, right? You just run a few Facebook ads and they just all come banging on your door, right?
Absolutely. Super easy. Not at all. Not for 1 second is it easy,
Tell us a little bit about the challenges of enrolling someone and getting people to say, what is this thing? Yes, I want that. Here's my money. And also, how did that impact you as feeling that imposter syndrome you mentioned earlier?
A big part of the imposter syndrome for me from the beginning, people were saying, you should put yourself out there. You should, you need to be talking to these families and these kids immediately. And I kept thinking, you know what, but they're not here for me. They're here to study with Colin Carr and Johannes Moser and Astrid Schween and Marcy Rosen. Like, they're here, they're coming for the big names. And it actually wasn't, they are, of course, but it wasn't until I started putting my face out there more and we had a Facebook page for the festival until, I started doing some Facebook Lives in there and answering questions and really getting to know the kids and their parents and talking to them. So of course they know who Colin Carr is and Johannes Moser, and of course they want their kids to have exposure to them, and of course the kids are interested in doing that. But until they knew me, the person who's putting it together, they weren't going to trust it. So that was a lesson I learned sort of midway through. So there was tons of interest. Everybody was following us. A lot of people started applications but didn't finish them. They did eventually. And another thing that I learned was that deadlines mean absolutely nothing to musicians.
Yes.
I've learned that in the adult world as well. Deadlines mean nothing to adult musicians either. So yeah, I had all of these milestones of saying like, okay, well, the application deadline is this day. And, it was like crickets. And I'm thinking, I was wrong. Nobody wants this. And then 2 weeks later, I have 50 people. So it all sort of came down right to the wire. It was, now I laugh. Now I have the experience and I knew what to expect. So when I launched things this fall, they worked exactly the same way, but I was ready for them. I was prepared for them. And yeah, it's just the way it goes.
Okay, so that's the takeaway right there. You've got these renowned artists that have recognizable marquee names, and you led with that thinking, nobody wants to connect with me. I'm going to surround myself with all of these big names, and that's going to launch my program. That's going to get my offer. That's going to help me bridge my skills to the people that need it. When the thing that actually turned the key was saying, this is me. I'm the conduit here. I'm the thing that's bringing this to you. And that's what resonated. And I think that is so important, not only for people thinking about starting an online business or for improving and increasing their studio from one-on-one lessons to something more impactful, but just for any artist or creative person who wants to advocate for what they're doing. It has to be you. People aren't buying the actual piece of art. They're buying you. They're buying the energy that you put into it. And by the way, if you're shrinking because you think you're not worthy of either the actual value of that or even someone's attention, that will resonate through your thing too, and people will walk right past it.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and, by the end of the festival, kids were saying, I haven't had a lesson with you. Like some of the more, the older, more advanced graduate students, I was just giving them to the top teachers. And by the end of the festival, they're like, how come I didn't get a lesson with you? I'm like, oh, So we all have to give ourselves a little bit more credit. People want to have access to us, and they want to get to know us, the human behind the projects.
Let's jump ahead to, you had another thing you alluded to a moment ago, is the Bridge Online Cello Studio for high school and college students, which is currently running, or is that's a year-long program, right?
Yeah, we started in September and it's 9 months, so we'll go to the end of May.
So you can check that out in the links below. I'll make sure I link that up for Kate. But I want to spend a little bit of time talking about rewriting the script about how good musicians have to be starving artists in order to be validated or to be tapped into their creativity or to actually make enough money to do the things that they want to. And you mentioned earlier, freelancers don't get paid enough money, nor do orchestra musicians, in my opinion, based on the years and the level of expertise they're bringing. If you compare what we do to professional athletes, for example, it's not even comparable, actually.
Yeah.
So tell me about the Profit Pivot, what that is, why you created it, and what is it you're trying to bring to musicians who are trying to level up and do something bigger.
The Profit Pivot is a 10-week group coaching program that I started this fall in response to all of my colleagues and people, strangers in the musical community that were reaching out to me, having heard about the Virtual Summer Cello Festival, saying, "How did you do that? That was amazing. I have these ideas, but I could never do that." And, my response is yes. Yes, you can do that, and you absolutely should do that. And I think that the reason that people don't take advantage of these ideas that pop into our heads, that we know are great ideas, I think it's one of a few things, and maybe all of them. I think a lot of musicians that are performing think, if I do anything other than performing, people will think less of me as a musician. If I was the kind of person who swore on podcasts, I would be doing that right now. That's just not true. It's just absolutely not true. If Tom Brady launched a footwear line, does it make him less of a football player? No, maybe. I don't know. It depends on where you live and how you feel about the Patriots. So yeah, I think people worry that they will be seen as a less good musician. And then I think that people underestimate what they could do if they actually made a decent income, right? There's this stigma if you're doing something that makes money, then you're not a true artist. Then they go to, sorry, Boston University, I know you're trying, but I taught many Sundays for years, and Boston University has a lot of money, and the School of Graduate Affairs, the School of Business, the School of Medicine, they are beautiful, gorgeous, well-appointed buildings. And you go to the College of Fine Arts, and it's a dumpster. And it's because you don't have alums coming from the School of Fine Arts that are donating money. They're not making enough money to donate it back to the college. And, so then we complain, well, there's not a decent concert hall here at this music school. It's like, well, go and make some money and donate it to your alma mater. Create scholarships for other students to learn music. Donate instruments. There are a million things that somebody could do. And 100 reasons why a professional musician should make good on a project, an idea, and make some money and still perform. And right now we can't perform. So a lot of people are, I feel stubbornly, and I know a lot of people are just feeling overwhelmed. But sometimes I look at some people and I think that you're just sort of sitting there stubbornly saying, like, no, I will only perform and I will wait and I will eat cat food if I need to. And it's like, okay.
There's nothing romantic about starving for your art. I've said this a million times. It's a lot easier to create when you're not panicking about paying the rent or an unexpected auto repair. It's nice to be able to have that freedom.
Absolutely. I was making enough money when I moved here that I could take some time off and really explore my own playing. I couldn't do that if I was in dire straits financially. And I think about what an incredible world the classical music scene would be if more of us were making a decent income, making a great income. What if we were making tons of money while making great art and giving back to our communities and the next generation? Like, can you imagine how wonderful that would be? Can you imagine the level of creative projects that would happen because they were funded and because people had time, because they weren't squeezing one last funeral into their Wednesday afternoon?
What would you say to someone who is right on the edge of taking the Profit Pivot course with you, but just is feeling scared for all those reasons to make the leap and say, all right, I'm finally going to do this? What would you say to that person?
I would say that the group atmosphere of a program like Profit Pivot is exactly where you need to be, because having a bunch of people around you who are checking in with you and you're checking in with them on a weekly basis, and they are going through the same things and the same issues, and being held accountable and being supported and being held up is the most perfect place for you to be to launch a project.
Fantastic. I see a bookshelf behind you, and I always like to ask the question when I see a lot of books, what's one or two books you could give us that, since you're on an island, this is like your actual island bookshelf. What do you have back there? What's one book that we just really need to read that you've read?
Well, those are just my boring cello books. The really good bookshelf is over here. And I would say Atomic Habits by James Clear, High Performance Habits by Brendan Burchard. And I would say, I don't have this on my bookshelf because I just listened to it on audiobooks, but Deep Work by Cal Newport. Talks a lot about giving yourself the time to really delve deeply into a project, whether that is for, taking yourself literally to a desert island for a month and writing a book, or if it's just carving out 2 to 3 hour periods in your calendar to just work well. Of course, musicians, we are very good at doing that for practicing, but we should do it in other areas of our life as well.
Awesome. Kate, thank you so much for taking the time and opening up your studio to us and giving your insights and the challenges of running a business. And I love the example of your life pivot from living in Boston to literally moving to a desert island is just poetic. So thanks for sharing. Where can people connect with you online?
You can find me at katekayaian.com, which is my website, which has links to all of the programs as well as the blog, Tales from the Lane. And you can find me on Facebook. I have you can just friend me on Facebook, but also I have a Tales from the Lane Facebook group, which is, as I say, sort of the party version of the blog, which is a lot of fun. So come find me there, come join us, and join the party.
Speaking of joining you, we need to start planning that Coaches Summit in Bermuda. What are we going to do, 3 weeks? Does that sound good?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. Bermuda is giving out 1-year residencies this year because we have no tourists. So if you want to pack Amanda up and the kids, come on over.
As long as you've got an internet connection, we're good to go.
Yep.
Kate, thanks for being here. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Chris. Have a good one.
Bye. Big thanks to Kate for spending some time with us today on the show and for making all of us who do not happen to live in a tropical island paradise feel totally jealous. What do you think, musician entrepreneurs? Shall we set moving to an island as a future life goal? I'm totally in. Speaking of being totally in, I want to thank all of you for jumping on and listening to and supporting this podcast. I've been having an amazing time connecting to some of the most brilliant minds in our industry, and I'm thrilled you're getting something out of it too. I'd also like to invite you right now to become an Honesty Pill subscriber. So how do you do that, and why would you want to do that? You can get in the loop for tips, insights, and strategies delivered right to your inbox by clicking the link in the show notes below marked subscribe, or you can head over to honestypill.com and subscribe there. As for why you'd want to become a subscriber, to get access to all of my free resources and trainings, to be the first to know about offers and workshop sessions, and I've got some big ones coming up that you will not want to miss. And best of all, it's totally free to join. But here's the thing though, only my subscribers are going to get invitations and access, so you've got to get on that list right now by clicking the subscribe link in the show notes. Okay, that's it from me today. This has been Honesty Pill Podcast Episode 8. You can find out more at honestypill.com. Check out the free resource library and subscribe over there. Thank you so much for listening. See you next time.